When Jake woke up the next morning, something in him had changed. It was like his whole body had been rewired overnight. No longer was he the man who walked around smiling, trusting blindly, believing everything was just fine because no one had said otherwise. That version of him had been stripped away, clean off the bone. What remained was a man running on instinct and a deep, gnawing need for answers. He went through his morning routine like usual, shoes laced, shirt tucked, coffee poured, but every move felt like part of a silent strategy. When he leaned in to kiss Lydia goodbye, she smiled like nothing had changed. She even threw in a casual joke about bringing her something from the road. And he smiled right back, just enough to sell it. Because today, she wasn't kissing her husband goodbye for a business trip. She was saying goodbye to the one person who still thought she was worth trusting. Or at least, that's what she believed. But Jake wasn't heading to Nashville. Not even close. A few blocks from home, he parked on a quiet side street, out of sight, and pulled up the live feed from the cameras he'd installed, one in the garage, one in the living room, another by the front door. He hadn't set them up in anger. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. He needed to know the truth, because going another day without clawing at him would have eaten him alive. For hours, nothing happened. Lydia left like she always did, dressed for work, locking the door behind her. She even smiled as she walked to the car, same as every other day. He watched her drive off, tracked her phone, checked the cameras. Nothing. By noon, part of him started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. Maybe he had overreacted. Maybe the nickname had been some strange coincidence. Maybe his imagination had just gotten the better of him. But all that wishful thinking blew apart at exactly 3:07 p.m. That's when the garage camera lit up with a motion alert. Jake sat up straight and opened the live feed. What he saw hit harder than anything he'd ever felt. The garage door rolled open, and Lydia's car pulled in. But she wasn't alone. Right behind her, Damien's sleek black car slid in like it belonged there. And then, as if it were just a casual Tuesday afternoon, they got out together. Lydia adjusted her hair, laughing at something Damien said. He reached out, placed a hand gently on her lower back, and they walked toward the front door like they did it every day. No hesitation, no guilt, no fear of being seen, like they had nothing to hide. Jake's hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly he thought he might snap it in two. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the ease of it, the routine. They weren't having a fling. They were living a second life under his roof. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't suspicion. It was fact. It was right there, in high definition, streaming on his phone, as real as the blood rushing to his ears. So he started the car, and with a steady kind of fury, he headed home. Because this was the day everything changed. He wanted to believe he was wrong, that his mind had taken one random moment and twisted it into something ugly. That a simple word, a nickname tossed out in a half-drunken joke, wasn't the smoking gun his gut told him it was. But once the seed was planted, it was like ivy growing fast through the cracks in his foundation. It didn't matter how much he tried to ignore it. The doubt had roots now. Jake floated through the rest of the party like a man wearing a mask. He smiled on cue, raised his glass when someone toasted, laughed when everyone else did. But inside, his thoughts raced. He watched Lydia like a stranger, studied the way she moved, how she leaned in when she laughed with Damien, how her smile stretched just a little too wide when she looked at her boss. Every little detail suddenly meant something, even if he didn't know it yet. The ride home was eerily normal. Lydia chattered about the party, gossiped about someone's dress, joked about the shrimp cocktail running out too early. She was calm, casual, not a flicker of guilt in her voice. And that made it worse. Because if she was hiding something, she was good at it. Too good. Jake nodded along, made the right noises, but didn't say much. He just drove. By the time they pulled into the driveway, he felt like a stranger parking at a stranger's house. That night, as they lay in bed, he closed his eyes and let out the soft, steady breathing of a man pretending to sleep. But inside, his mind ran wild. Every second from that day replayed on a loop, Carter's slip-up, the look between Lydia and Damien, that strange hollowness in her laugh. Sleep never came. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, the decision made itself. He couldn't live like this. Not in the dark, not haunted by maybes. He needed the truth. And if it meant digging for it, so be it. By morning, Jake was a different man. Quiet. Focused. He moved through the house with a strange calm as he packed for a business trip that didn't exist. His hands were steady as he double-checked the small security cameras he'd installed around the house, sleek little things hidden in corners and tucked under shelves. One in the living room, one near the front door, one in the kitchen, and a new one he'd installed in the garage just yesterday. All of them synced straight to his phone, all of them watching. Before leaving, he kissed Lydia like he always did. She smiled and told him to drive safe. Even joked about bringing her back something from Nashville. Her voice didn't tremble. Her eyes didn't flinch. Either she was innocent, or she had gotten real good at lying. Jake said goodbye, got in his car, and drove. But he didn't leave town. Just a few streets away, in a quiet neighborhood filled with old oak trees and sleepy sidewalks, he parked. Then he sat back, phone in hand, eyes locked on the live feeds. Waiting. Because today, he wasn't a husband. He was a man watching his own life, hoping to prove himself wrong, and dreading what would happen if he turned out to be right. Jake tapped the camera feed open on his phone, leaned back in the driver's seat, and stared at the screen like it held the answer to every question clawing at his gut. Morning light filtered through the windshield, but his focus was laser-tight. He watched the front of the house, the driveway, the door. Nothing unusual. Just after 8:30, he saw Lydia step outside, dressed like she always was for work. Neatly pressed slacks, a soft blouse, her bag slung casually over one shoulder. She moved like it was any other day, calm, unrushed. She locked the door, glanced once over her shoulder, and drove off. Jake tracked her car on the GPS he'd hidden months ago when he'd had it installed under the excuse of emergency safety. She went straight to her office building downtown. She stayed there. No suspicious detours. No shady stops. Nothing out of the ordinary. The hours crawled by. Mid-morning turned to noon, and Jake still sat parked in his quiet little hiding spot, bouncing between camera feeds, checking timestamps, sipping lukewarm coffee, and trying to steady the storm inside him. Everything looked clean, normal, honest. A part of him wanted to believe it was over, that all this was just a fever dream cooked up by his insecurities. That maybe Carter's slip at the party was just a weird coincidence. That the camera plan had been a dramatic overreaction. His own paranoia turning shadows into monsters. But then, at 3:07 p.m., everything changed. A soft ping broke the silence inside the car, a motion alert from the garage camera. Jake's heart skipped. He snatched the phone off the console and tapped into the live feed. The garage door was rolling up slowly, daylight flooding in. Lydia's car pulled in first. And right behind her was another vehicle. Black, sleek, familiar. Damien's car. Jake's breath caught in his throat. His wife, who supposedly had been at work all day, was now home. And she wasn't alone. His eyes locked onto the screen as Lydia stepped out, cool and collected, like nothing was out of place. She brushed a hand through her hair, looked over at Damien, and smiled. That smile. That comfortable, familiar, almost domestic smile, the kind meant for someone you're used to being around. Someone you're not afraid to be caught with. Someone who's been there before. Damien followed behind her, just as casual. No hesitation. No nerves. No guilt. As if this wasn't their first time pulling this off. And Jake, sitting just blocks away, felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. This wasn't some misunderstanding. It wasn't a stretch or a leap or something that could be reasoned away. It was real. And what he saw next drove the knife even deeper. The moment Lydia shut her car door, Damien stepped forward like he belonged there. He wrapped his arm around her waist, not in a cautious, sneaky way, but with ease, with familiarity, like it was something he'd done 100 times before. And Lydia, she didn't flinch. She leaned into him. They didn't even pretend to be discreet. No checking over their shoulders. No quick, guilty glances. Just the two of them, walking up to Jake's front door, his door, side by side, wrapped up in each other like they had every right to be there. Jake watched from his screen, frozen. That embrace wasn't some friendly gesture. It was intimate, deep-rooted, the kind you only give to someone who knows you well and who has permission to touch you like that. Then the door opened, and they slipped inside. Together. Jake's gut twisted so hard it made him double over in the driver's seat. He couldn't breathe. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the overwhelming heat climbing up from his chest to his face. His whole body trembled, not from fear, but from the rage that surged like a broken dam. That was his home, his wife, his life. And they had just walked right in like it was theirs. He didn't even realize he'd thrown the phone until it landed with a thud on the passenger seat. His hands were already gripping the steering wheel. The engine roared to life. He slammed the car into gear and shot forward. No more doubt. No more surveillance. No more wondering. Today was the day he put an end to it. He didn't think. Didn't plan. Every block he passed felt like fuel to the fire, each streetlight he blew through adding to the storm churning in his chest. His jaw clenched. His knuckles turned white. The pressure in his skull throbbed like a drum. I'm going to catch them. It's over. Today, this ends. The words ran like a loop in his head, syncing with the beat of his heart, each repetition sharpening his focus. Every second added another layer to the betrayal, every laugh they shared in secret, every excuse she fed him, every moment she played the loving wife while erasing him behind closed doors. And what made it worse, what really twisted the knife, was that it had happened right under his nose. In his house. In the space they built together, memory by memory. As he turned onto the street, he slowed. He couldn't risk alerting them. Couldn't let them scatter like roaches before he got the chance to face them. He parked quietly on the side road, 2 houses down. Their cars were still in the driveway. He stepped out slowly, adjusting his shirt, taking a long breath to center himself, but it was no use. The fury had a pulse of its own. It rattled in his bones, echoed in his ears. Then he walked. Firm. Focused. Not like a man broken, but like one who was done being lied to. When he reached the porch, his hand closed around the doorknob. It was unlocked. That detail, that carelessness, told him more than words ever could. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. They were so bold, so convinced they were untouchable, that they hadn't even bothered to lock the front door. That little detail hit Jake harder than anything. It wasn't just arrogance, it was pure disrespect. Like they truly believed they'd never be caught. He turned the handle, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. And what he saw the moment he crossed that threshold, it would stay carved in his memory until the day he died. There they were, on his couch. Their couch. Lydia and Damien, sitting close, too close. Her hand rested on his leg, casual and familiar. His fingers were curled around hers like it was the most normal thing in the world. They were laughing, talking, completely at ease, like this was some cozy Sunday afternoon and not a total betrayal of everything Jake had built. The moment they heard the door, both of their heads snapped toward it. And silence fell like a bomb. Lydia's smile vanished instantly, like someone had hit a switch. Her face drained of color. She froze, her entire body stiffening like it had turned to stone. And Damien, he flinched, pulled away a few inches, then tried to play it cool. To sit up straighter, compose himself, as if there was still a sliver of plausible deniability left. There wasn't. Jake didn't move. He just stood there, breathing heavy, shoulders squared, his eyes locked on them like he was staring through them. His jaw was clenched so tight it ached. And the fury that had been roaring in his chest just paused. It didn't fade. It simply sharpened, transformed into something colder, harder, deadlier. Control. Because in that moment, Jake understood, he didn't need to yell. He didn't need to fight or make a scene. The truth was laid bare. They were caught. Fully, completely, without escape. Lydia started to rise from the couch, her mouth opening as if to speak. But Jake's voice stopped her mid-motion. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was clear, cold, and heavy like lead. Don't even try to pretend. She froze in place. I know everything, he said, his words slicing through the silence. Every meeting, every touch, every lie. He turned slightly to Damien. And you, he added, with a look that could have dropped a grown man, you've got nothing to say. Don't even try. Damien's mouth opened like he might offer some half-baked excuse, but the moment Jake lifted a hand, just a small gesture, he stopped. His shoulders sagged. He sat back down without a word. Lydia's lips trembled. Her voice came out soft, desperate, trying to string together words that meant nothing. It was a mistake. A moment of weakness. Jake cut her off mid-sentence. No, he said. Don't insult me with that. His tone didn't change. It didn't have to. Every syllable hit like a hammer. I've wasted too much time listening to your lies. I don't want your stories anymore. You're not my wife. Not after this. He turned and walked upstairs, deliberate, unhurried. In their bedroom, he moved on instinct, grabbing only what mattered. Some clothes, his laptop, documents, personal items. Not much. Just enough. As he zipped up the last suitcase, Jake glanced over one more time. Lydia was still there, slumped forward on the couch, her face buried in her hands like she'd just been hit by a freight train. And in a way, she had. But it wasn't a collision, this was the crash she caused herself. He walked to the door slowly, not rushing, not looking back until he had to. Then he stopped, looked at her one last time, and with a voice stripped of emotion, said, "You'll hear from my lawyer soon. As of now, we're nothing. You can stay with Damien, if that's what you want. That's all you two have now, each other and your shame." And with that, he stepped out, pulled the door shut behind him, and left. As the door slammed, the sound echoed inside him like something final. His chest felt like it was splitting open, not just from heartbreak, but from the crushing realization that the woman he'd built a life with had never really existed. What he loved was a character, a well-rehearsed performance, and he believed every line. In the car, his hands shook as he dialed. His lawyer picked up. Jake explained everything, what he'd seen, the footage, the photos, every bit of evidence he had. She didn't waste time. Her voice was calm, assured. With what he had, she said, Lydia wouldn't get a dime. The house, the company, the assets, they were his. No alimony, no payout, no strings. And with no minor children, the divorce would be fast. Brutal, but fast. In the days that followed, Jake stayed busy. The lawyer handled it all with surgical precision. Every paper filed, every clip timestamped, every image submitted. When the notification landed in Lydia's hands, she didn't even bother fighting it. What was she going to say? The evidence was crystal clear. The betrayal had been caught from every angle. The whole process, divorce, asset division, final ruling, was over in record time. Jake kept everything, the house, the cars, the business, the freedom. Lydia? She left with the clothes on her back and whatever was personal enough not to fight over. And as for Damien? Whatever fantasy he had of stepping into Jake's life and reaping the rewards came crashing down fast. Because along with Lydia, he inherited everything she'd become: baggage, chaos, and all. But it didn't stop there. The story leaked. Maybe from a former employee, maybe a loose friend, no one really knows. But once it was out, it spread like wildfire. The affair, the betrayal, the footage. People in their circle couldn't stop talking. And in the business world, perception is everything. Contract after contract was pulled. Partnerships dried up. Clients backed out. Whispers turned into investigations. Allegations surfaced. People began to question his ethics, not just personally, but professionally. The empire Damien had built over decades started to crumble. Fast. The same folks who used to praise him, invite him, rely on him, now wouldn't take his calls. He went from VIP to untouchable overnight. Lydia, once the queen of social events, was ghosted by the same people she used to toast champagne with. Messages went unanswered. Invitations disappeared. What was once a carefully curated life of luxury and admiration faded into complete silence. Meanwhile, Jake, he moved forward. Even with the pain, the scars, the questions that lingered late at night, he knew something with absolute clarity. This wasn't a defeat. This was a release. Sometimes, losing someone isn't the end of the world. Sometimes, it's the beginning of getting your world back. Jake stood at the window of his office one late afternoon, watching the light turn golden as it spilled across the trees outside. The world looked calm. But inside, there was still a quiet storm he managed only by keeping busy: company expansion, gym mornings, charity meetings, even new recipes he tried cooking just to fill the silence in the evenings. He wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't untouched. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, an envelope showed up at his doorstep. No return address. Inside was a single photo, grainy, clearly taken from a distance. It was Lydia, sitting at a sidewalk cafe. But not alone. Across from her sat a man Jake had never seen before. Tall, clean-cut, and staring at Lydia with the same intensity Jake remembered once seeing in Damien's eyes. There was no message. No note. Just the picture. Jake stared at it for a long time before setting it down. He wasn't sure what unsettled him more, the content, or the fact that someone had gone to the trouble of sending it. He didn't call anyone, didn't storm off or lash out. He just filed it in a drawer. But that night, sleep didn't come easy. And the next morning, another envelope arrived. This one had 4 photos. Same man, same woman, different locations. A hotel lobby, a bookstore, A quiet park bench. Every image more intimate than the last, not romantic, but private. Too private. Jake started wondering, was someone watching Lydia? Or was someone watching him? Jake didn't tell anyone about the envelopes. Not even his lawyer or the detective he had used during the divorce. Something about it felt unfinished, like whoever sent them wanted him to react. But Jake had spent the past year learning how not to react. That was his strength now. Silence, patience, watching instead of charging. Still, the images stayed in his mind. That man's face. The way Lydia looked at him. Not guilty or cautious, but almost submissive. Like she was being told something she didn't like, but had to accept. By Friday, a third envelope showed up. This time, it held only a note. You think you know what happened? You don't. Dig deeper. No signature. Just those words on a plain piece of paper. Jake stared at it for a long while. By Monday, he made a quiet decision. He'd dig. Not for Lydia's sake. Not out of curiosity. But because the only thing worse than betrayal is being blindsided twice. He called in a favor from his old security consultant, Travis, someone he hadn't spoken to since upgrading the office surveillance systems during a corporate threat a few years back. Jake explained the situation briefly, carefully. I'm not asking you to stalk anyone, he said. Just help me figure out who this guy is. Travis agreed, no questions asked. And within a few days, he had something. The man's name was Julian Reed. He had no criminal record, no business registration, no social media presence. Just a single traceable address. One apartment in a dull, upscale complex on the east side of town. Too clean. Too quiet. Jake drove by once, slowly. Saw the building. Saw the buzzer with Julian Reed's name. But he didn't press it. Just sat in his truck, watching. That's when he saw Lydia. She walked out of the building's side entrance. Head down. Alone. But it wasn't just that she was there. It was what she held in her hand. A manila folder, thick with papers, clutched like it weighed more than it should. And the look on her face wasn't the look of someone in love. It was fear. Real fear. Jake stayed in the truck, his knuckles white around the steering wheel, heart pounding. Not with anger this time, but with something colder. Sharper. A realization. Lydia wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of Julian Reed. The folder she held, that wasn't love letters. That was leverage. Later that night, Travis sent a text. You were right to be suspicious. Reed's not just anyone. He's ex-corporate intel. Fired after a whistleblower scandal. Went dark after that. But guess which company he used to work for? Jake didn't need to guess. Harrington Holdings. Damien's company. The one Lydia worked at. The one that imploded after the affair came to light. Something wasn't adding up. What if the affair wasn't just emotional chaos? What if Lydia had been part of something much larger, willingly or not? Jake started making calls to a few old industry contacts. Quietly, carefully, he dug into Harrington Holdings' past deals, mergers, and corporate acquisitions, especially those Lydia had been near. And then he found it, buried deep in a civil court archive. A whistleblower had once accused Harrington Holdings of money laundering and falsifying foreign assets. The case went nowhere. Dismissed quietly. Guess who the whistleblower was? Julian Reed. Jake leaned back in his chair, the laptop screen glowing in the dark room. His hands were still. His thoughts weren't. If Julian had tried to take the company down before, and Damien shut it down, maybe now he was back. And maybe Lydia wasn't his lover after all. Maybe she was his leverage. And that meant Jake had stumbled into a game with rules he didn't understand yet. But one thing was clear. He wasn't out of it. Not yet. It was past midnight when the knock came. Jake wasn't asleep. He rarely slept more than a few hours these days. Ever since the folder, the research, and Julian Reed's name popped up again, he'd been wired tight. Watching the street from his window had become a habit. But tonight, it wasn't a stranger outside. It was her, Lydia, standing on the porch in a coat too thin for the weather, her eyes puffy, makeup streaked, and something in her hands, wrapped in plastic, sealed with tape. A different kind of envelope this time. Jake didn't open the door right away. He just stared through the window. Let her feel it. The waiting. The distance. After a long pause, he opened it, but only halfway. Lydia didn't ask to come in. I know I have no right to be here, she said, voice cracking. But I don't have anyone else I can trust with this. She held up the package. Jake didn't take it. What is it? Proof, she said. Everything Damien buried. Everything Julian is trying to use to blackmail the board. It was never just about you and me, Jake. I was in over my head. I still am. He studied her face. You came to me because you think I'll protect you. I came to you because I know you don't lie, she said. Because when everything burned down, you were the only one who didn't walk away from the fire. Jake looked at the package, then at her again. This doesn't change what you did. I know, she whispered. But maybe it changes what I do next. He let the silence sit for a beat, then stepped aside. Come in. And close the door behind you. Lydia stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the familiar hallway like it was some museum of a life she'd ruined. Jake motioned her to the kitchen without a word. They sat opposite each other, the envelope between them on the table like a live wire. Jake broke the silence. Start talking. Lydia took a breath and tapped the package. There are internal emails, meeting recordings, and bank statements. Damien. He was laundering money through shell companies tied to defense contracts. Overseas accounts, ghost suppliers, fake bids, it's all here. Jake narrowed his eyes. And Julian Reed? Julian knew. He got his hands on a partial file when he was still auditing risk reports. He threatened to go public unless Damien handed over full voting control of the board. That's why Damien stepped down voluntarily last month. It was a cover. Jake picked up the envelope, felt the weight of it. And what's your angle? He asked flatly. Guilt. Lydia shook her head slowly. Fear. After everything collapsed, I started digging through old files at the firm. I found this, and 2 days later, someone broke into my car. They didn't take anything. Just left a burner phone in the glove box. It rang once. No message. Just silence. Jake clenched his jaw. And now you're handing this to me. I can't go to the police. Not alone. But you? You have contacts. You have a reputation that still means something. Jake stood up, paced once across the room, then turned. You do realize, he said, if I take this to someone, I'm dragging myself back into your mess. I'm putting my name, my life, back in the blast zone. Lydia's voice was barely above a whisper. Then don't do it for me. Do it for the truth. Jake stared at the envelope. Then, slowly, deliberately, he picked it up. He didn't say a word, but he didn't throw it away either. Outside, in the cold silence, a black car idled across the street, headlights off. Watching.